Picture this: a family, broken and desperate, trapped on land they once dreamed would be their future. Their animals mutilated, their sanity questioned. Their financial security was destroyed. The Sherman family had reached the end of their rope by early 1996, living through a nightmare that defied every law of nature and reason. They were prisoners on their own property, held captive not by chains or walls, but by something far more sinister, something that shouldn't exist. But here's where the story takes an unexpected turn. Because while the Shermans were preparing to abandon everything they'd worked for, someone was listening. Someone with the resources, the scientific expertise, and most importantly, the willingness to believe that sometimes the impossible is simply the unexplained. What happened next would become one of the most extensively documented paranormal investigations in modern history. And the findings, well, they're about to challenge everything you think you know about reality itself. The billionaire who believed Robert Bigelow wasn't your typical billionaire real estate mogul. While most wealthy entrepreneurs invested in luxury properties and commercial developments, Bigelow had a different obsession entirely. He'd spent years quietly funding research into phenomena that most scientists wouldn't touch with a 10-foot pole. UFO sightings, consciousness studies, life after death. But in March 1996, he was about to launch his most ambitious project yet, the National Institute for Discovery Science, NIDS for short. The very name suggested something unprecedented, a legitimate scientific organization dedicated to investigating the unexplained. But this wasn't some ragtag group of amateur ghost hunters or conspiracy theorists working out of someone's garage. Bigelow was assembling an elite task force that would make most university research departments envious. Think about what he was creating here. A fully funded, state-of-the-art equipped team of credentialed scientists who could deploy anywhere in the country within hours. We're talking PhD professors with specializations spanning the entire scientific spectrum: biochemistry, physics, psychology, veterinary medicine, astrophysics. These weren't fringe academics desperate for attention. These were respected professionals with sterling reputations, many of whom were risking their careers by even associating with paranormal research. And here's what made NIDS truly revolutionary. Bigelow insisted on recruiting only scientists with deeply skeptical mindsets. He didn't want true believers who would see UFOs in every flickering light or demons in every shadow. He wanted hard-nosed investigators who would exhaust every rational explanation before even considering paranormal possibilities. He wanted people who would look for mundane causes first: weather phenomena, military aircraft, natural geological processes, psychological factors, anything that could explain away the strange reports flooding in from across the country. The advisory board he assembled read like a who's who of academic excellence. Over 25 members total, the majority holding advanced degrees and tenured positions. He even brought in former military personnel to handle security and logistics. This wasn't just a research team, it was a rapid response unit for the paranormal. Two names would become particularly significant in the years ahead: Dr. Eric Davis, a physicist with an impressive background in advanced propulsion concepts, and Dr. Colm Kelleher, a biochemist whose analytical mind and attention to detail would prove invaluable. Kelleher would eventually document the entire investigation in a book that would captivate readers worldwide, Hunt for the Skinwalker, co-written with investigative journalist George Knapp. Now, word about strange happenings travels fast in scientific circles, especially when those happenings involve multiple witnesses and physical evidence. And in the spring of 1996, rumors were circulating about a small cattle ranch in northeastern Utah where UFOs apparently appeared with unsettling regularity. Terry Sherman had finally broken his silence earlier that year, reluctantly approaching a local newspaper. It was a desperate move, really. The man was a proud rancher, not someone who sought attention or enjoyed being the subject of gossip. But he was also at his wit's end. His theory? Military technology, secret government experiments. He didn't believe in little green men or Native American curses. He believed that some shadowy government program was using his property as a testing ground, and he hoped that public exposure might make them back off. The story caught Bigelow's attention immediately. Here was something extraordinary, not just random UFO sightings reported by a single witness. but ongoing, sustained paranormal activity occurring on a specific, contained property, a natural laboratory, if you will. A place where ENIDS could set up permanent observation posts, deploy their equipment, and actually study these phenomena in real time rather than chasing reports after the fact. By summer 1996, Bigelow called a meeting with his team. The opportunity was too perfect to ignore. Think about it from a scientific perspective, a controlled environment where multiple types of phenomena were occurring regularly, far from prying eyes and public interference, owned by credible witnesses who desperately wanted answers. This was exactly what NIDS had been formed to investigate. Within weeks, the team had traveled to Utah and met with the Sherman family. As Terry, Gwen, and their children recounted their experiences, the mutilated cattle, the impossible lights, the creatures that shouldn't exist, the poltergeist activity, the NIDS scientists listened with increasing fascination. Yes, the stories sounded absolutely insane, but the Shermans weren't crazy. They were educated, level-headed people who were clearly traumatized by whatever they'd experienced. Bigelow made them an offer. He would purchase the property outright. The Shermans could walk away, start fresh somewhere else, free from the nightmare that had consumed their lives for 2 years. For Gwen and the children, the answer was immediate. Yes, absolutely, get us out of here. They would have left everything behind without a second thought, grateful just to escape with their lives and sanity intact. But Terry hesitated. Despite everything, the financial losses, the terror, the sleepless nights, part of him wasn't ready to surrender. This was his land, his dream, and he still didn't have answers. What had driven them away? What had destroyed his livelihood? The questions gnawed at him, so he proposed a compromise. He would sell the ranch to NIDS, but he wanted to stay on as ranch manager. The scientific team needed someone who knew the land, someone experienced with livestock and ranch operations. And Terry needed closure. He needed to see how this investigation would unfold, what explanations these brilliant scientists might discover. NIDS agreed immediately. After all, they were academics and researchers, not ranchers. They wouldn't know the first thing about maintaining the property or caring for livestock. Having Terry Sherman on site was invaluable. The purchase went through quickly. Along with the land, NIDS bought cattle to serve as bait, because by now everyone understood that something on this property had a particular interest in the animals. Terry even agreed to keep some of his own prize cattle on the ranch for the same purpose, despite having lost so many already. By September 1996, the transformation was complete. NIDS rolled their mobile laboratory and observation trailer onto the property. The field team moved in, 4 core scientists supported by a rotating group of assistant investigators who would maintain a presence at the ranch 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. This wasn't a weekend investigation. This was a full-scale, long-term scientific occupation. Their mission was clear: observe, document, analyze, and present findings to the advisory board in monthly meetings. Whatever was happening on Skinwalker Ranch was about to face the full scrutiny of modern science. The scientific method meets the unexplained. The first thing any good scientist does when confronted with extraordinary claims is look for ordinary explanations. The NIDS team arrived at Skinwalker Ranch with healthy skepticism and a long checklist of mundane possibilities to eliminate. Were the Shermans lying? Were they fabricating stories to offload a failing property? It seemed unlikely, after all. Claiming your ranch is haunted by interdimensional beings and UFOs isn't exactly a great sales pitch. But it had to be considered and investigated. Were they experiencing mass delusion? Shared psychosis? The team needed to rule out psychological factors. They conducted interviews, background checks, psychological evaluations. Could an entire family be experiencing the same hallucinations? Technically possible, but the odds were astronomically low, especially when neighbors reported similar phenomena. Environmental factors had to be examined thoroughly. Could there be something in the land itself causing these experiences? Were hallucinogenic compounds present in native plants? The team collected soil samples, analyzed vegetation, tested for any natural substances that might affect perception or mental state. What about the water supply? Contamination could cause all sorts of neurological effects. Every water source on the property was tested extensively for toxins, heavy metals, bacteria, parasites, anything that might explain altered mental states or shared delusions. Electromagnetic fields were another possibility. High EMF exposure has been linked to feelings of paranoia, sensations of being watched, even visual hallucinations. The team deployed meters and sensors across the entire property, mapping electromagnetic activity in minute detail. Infrasound was on the list too. These ultra-low frequency sound waves, below the threshold of human hearing, can cause anxiety, dread, and even visual disturbances. Could there be a natural or artificial source of infrasound affecting everyone who spent time on the ranch? Geological factors couldn't be ignored either. Were there fault lines running beneath the property? Tectonic stress and minor seismic activity have been theorized to cause light anomalies and psychological effects. The team brought in geological surveys and ground-penetrating radar. Month after month, test after test, the results came back the same. Negative, negative, negative. No hallucinogenic compounds. No water contamination. No unusual electromagnetic fields, well, not at first anyway. No infrasound sources. No geological anomalies that would explain the phenomena. The Shermans weren't lying. They weren't delusional. There was nothing in the environment causing hallucinations or shared psychosis, which left only one possibility. Something genuinely anomalous was occurring on this property. The remainder of 1996 passed relatively quietly. The NIDS team observed a few strange lights in the night sky. Interesting, but hardly conclusive. Could be aircraft, satellites, meteors. As the months dragged on with no major incidents, some team members began to wonder if perhaps the phenomena had been exaggerated. If the Shermans had misinterpreted natural events in their stressed state of mind, that skepticism wouldn't last long. March 9th, 1997. The daylight mutilation Terry. Sherman and his wife Gwen rarely worked together on the ranch anymore. Gwen had essentially left the property after selling it, too traumatized to return except when absolutely necessary. But on this particular day, Terry needed help tagging new calves and she reluctantly agreed to assist. It was mid-morning, clear skies, perfect visibility. They'd just finished tagging a young Black Angus calf near the homestead when they moved about 300 yards south to tag others grazing in that area. One of the ranch dogs accompanied them, trotting along without concern. They'd been working for maybe 30 or 40 minutes when the dog's behavior changed dramatically. Its body went rigid, hackles raised, a low growl rumbling from its throat. The animal was staring back toward the homestead, toward the area where they'd tagged that first calf. Terry and Gwen followed the dog's gaze and immediately saw something was wrong. The mother cow was pacing frantically, clearly distressed, limping back and forth in obvious agitation. They ran, 300 yards across open pasture, both of them already knowing something terrible had happened, but not wanting to believe it. When they reached the spot where the calf had been, where it had been standing healthy and alive less than 45 minutes earlier, they stopped dead in their tracks. The calf was on the ground, dead, but not just dead, surgically dismantled. Its entire abdominal cavity had been removed, gone, all internal organs, heart, lungs, liver, intestines, everything, cleanly excised. What remained was essentially a hollowed-out shell, the head, 4 legs, spinal column, and portions of the rib cage. One ear had been sliced off with what appeared to be a precision instrument, leaving a clean edge that no animal predator could create. And here's what made Terry's blood run cold. It was the ear he'd tagged less than an hour ago. The tag was still there, lying on the ground next to the severed ear. But the most disturbing detail? There was no blood, not a drop. Not on the grass, not pooled beneath the carcass, not spattered anywhere in the vicinity. 60 pounds of meat and organs removed from a living animal, and somehow not a single drop of blood remained at the scene. The mother cow continued her distressed pacing, her eyes wide with terror, making sounds that Terry had never heard from cattle before, almost like she was crying. When the NIDS veterinarian arrived and examined the carcass, he was at a complete loss. He'd seen predator kills before, mountain lions, coyotes, even bear attacks. He'd dealt with every form of livestock death imaginable. This was nothing like any of them. The cuts were too precise, too clean. The complete absence of blood was medically impossible if this had been done to a living animal. Yet the cow's behavior indicated her calf had been alive when they left it. The removal of organs was too thorough, too systematic, and all of this had occurred in broad daylight. in an open field within 45 minutes, with 2 humans working just 300 yards away. Neither Terry nor Gwen had seen anything, heard anything. No aircraft overhead, no vehicles approaching, no sounds of struggle from the calf. Just silence and then horror. When asked if they'd noticed anything unusual before finding the carcass, both mentioned a strange smell, heavy, musky, almost overwhelming. It had been present in the area, but they couldn't identify its source. The NEEDS team immediately launched into investigation mode. They photographed everything, took tissue samples for laboratory analysis, searched the entire area for any tracks or traces that might indicate what had done this. That's when someone noticed the dogs. The ranch had 3 observation towers strategically positioned around the property, each surrounded by chain-link fencing with dogs housed inside. These weren't pets. They were biological sensors, animals whose acute senses and behavior changes often preceded paranormal activity. All of the dogs were huddled in their shelters, refusing to come out. This wasn't normal behavior for mid-morning on a clear day. Terry mentioned that they'd been hiding since dawn, actually. Wouldn't emerge even for food. The team didn't understand the significance at the time. They would soon. 3 days later, the thing in the trees, March 12, 27:11 p.m. Darkness had settled over the ranch, the kind of deep rural darkness where stars outnumber streetlights by billions to one. Terry Sherman sat in the NIDS observation trailer with several team members, monitoring equipment and scanning the property through windows. Then the dogs erupted. All of them simultaneously, howling and barking with primal fear. The sound cut through the night air like a siren. All the animals focused on something beyond the pasture, near a copse of cottonwood trees. Terry and the NIDS team grabbed flashlights and piled into a truck. The vehicle had a powerful spotlight mounted on the roof, essential equipment for ranch work, and apparently for hunting whatever kept terrorizing the livestock. As they rounded the corner and the spotlight swept across the tree line, everyone in the truck saw it simultaneously. 2 large, yellow orbs reflecting the light from about 20 feet up in one of the cottonwoods. Eyes, massive eyes. Far too large to belong to any normal animal. Terry didn't hesitate. He grabbed his rifle from behind the seat, exited the truck, and used the open door as a brace. Through the rifle scope, he could make out more detail. A huge dark shape in the tree, easily the size of a large bear, but positioned in a way that no bear would sit. The creature didn't move. It simply stared back at him, those yellow eyes unblinking, almost challenging him. Terry's voice was quiet but determined. "I'm not letting it get another calf." The rifle's report echoed across the valley. Through the scope, Terry saw the eyes blink out. A heavy thud followed, the unmistakable sound of something large hitting the ground. They drove toward the tree line, stopping about 40 feet away. The spotlight illuminated the space beneath the cottonwoods. Nothing. No body, no blood, no sign of the creature at all. The team exited the vehicle and spread out, flashlights probing the darkness. They were maybe 5 yards apart when Terry's shout cut through the silence. "I see him!" 2 more shots rang out in rapid succession. The NIDS team ran toward Terry's position, hearing branches snap and crash as something massive blundered through the thicket, moving away from them at incredible speed. By the time they reached Terry, whatever he'd shot at was gone. But his face was pale, his hands slightly trembling as he lowered the rifle. "It looked like a huge dog," he said slowly, trying to process what he'd seen. But it was standing on 2 legs, running on 2 legs. They searched for over an hour, flashlights cutting through the darkness, occasionally calling out to each other to maintain position. Finally, they found something. 2 footprints, massive indentations in the soft earth. Each print measured 14 inches long. They were spaced 20 feet apart, the distance between steps. Deep claw marks gouged the earth at the front of each print. Whatever had made these tracks was enormous, bipedal, and fast enough to cover 20 feet in a single stride. Terry Sherman had just shot at something 3 times at close range and somehow missed every shot. Or had he? There was no blood trail, no evidence of injury. It was almost as if the thing had simply vanished. The dogs wouldn't stop barking for hours afterward. April 1997. Vanishing acts April 1st. A calf disappeared. Simply gone. No blood, no tracks, no evidence whatsoever. One moment present with the herd, the next moment erased from existence. The team barely had time to document this disappearance before April 2nd brought something even more bizarre. Terry and Gwen were working the eastern section of the property. Standard maintenance and tagging. They drove past the homestead around noon, and Gwen glanced over at the nearby corral. Their 4 prized Black Angus bulls stood inside, massive animals worth several $1,000s each. "I'd be heartbroken if anything happened to those bulls," Gwen commented absently. They represented a significant investment, genetic stock that Terry had carefully selected for breeding. They continued to the western boundary, repaired some damaged fencing, and tagged 2 calves that had been born overnight. Standard ranch work. Maybe an hour passed, perhaps slightly less. On the return trip, they rounded the bend approaching the homestead, and Gwen's heart stopped. The bulls were gone. Terry slammed on the brakes and jumped from the truck before it fully stopped. He ran to the corral gate, still locked, fence intact. 4 massive bulls had simply vanished from a secure enclosure in broad daylight. His mind raced through possibilities. Has someone stolen them? It's impossible. These animals were huge, temperamental, and would have required a cattle trailer and several experienced handlers. The gates showed no sign of being opened. Had they somehow broken through the fence? He examined every inch of the perimeter. Nothing. The fence was undamaged. Then something caught his eye, the old unused trailer that sat adjacent to the corral. He climbed up on a feeding trough and peered through one of the dirty skylights. All 4 bulls stood inside the cramped trailer, completely still, eyes unfocused, almost as if they were in some kind of trance. "They're in here." Terry shouted to Gwen, his voice a mixture of disbelief and concern. At the sound of his voice, the bulls suddenly jerked awake, like someone had flipped a switch. They seemed to suddenly register where they were, packed into a space far too small for even one of them, and panic set in immediately. The trailer erupted into chaos. 4 terrified bulls thrashing, kicking, bellowing. One of the back doors was kicked clean off its hinges, and the animals stampeded out into the sunlight, wild-eyed and disoriented. It took Terry and Gwen 2 full hours of careful, patient work to coax those traumatized animals back into the corral. When the NIDS team examined the trailer, they did so with mounting confusion. Getting 1 angry bull into that confined space would have been nearly impossible. Getting 4 bulls to peacefully share such cramped quarters was beyond impossible. These were territorial animals that would never tolerate such close quarters with each other. The only entrance from the corral to the trailer was a door that had been wired shut. When they examined it closely, they found ancient cobwebs still intact across the doorframe and internal panel, proof that this entrance hadn't been opened in years. So how did 4 massive bulls get into a sealed trailer in less than an hour? And why were they in what appeared to be a hypnotic trance? The team pulled out their magnetic field detectors and began scanning the area. The metal bars of the corral were highly magnetized, far beyond any natural level. The readings were off the charts. Over the following days, the magnetization gradually faded, but the incident prompted NIDS to conduct a comprehensive magnetic field survey of the entire property. The results would prove significant. The invisible predator. Late April 1997, Dr. Colm Kelleher was investigating unusual tracks on the southern section of the ranch. It was mid-afternoon, clear weather, perfect conditions for field work. He was alone but in radio contact with his team. As he photographed the prints and took measurements, a smell began to permeate the area. It was distinct, unusual, a heavy, musky odor that didn't match anything he'd encountered in months of working on the property. He'd become familiar with the scents of wildlife, livestock, vegetation. This was different. He looked around, trying to identify the source. About 50 yards away, he could see another team member, Dr. Marcus Chen, carefully making his way through some Russian olive trees. The smell didn't seem to be coming from that direction. Then the sensation hit him like a physical force. The hairs on the back of his neck stood straight up. His skin prickled with goosebumps despite the warm afternoon sun. A cold chill ran down his spine, the kind of primal fear response that evolution hardwired into human beings when predators were near. Something was watching him. He couldn't see it, couldn't hear it, but every instinct screamed that he was not alone, that he was being observed, studied. Dr. Kelleher forced himself to continue working, fighting the urge to run. He was a scientist, rational. This was just his imagination, surely. stress and suggestion playing tricks on his mind after hearing so many frightening stories. But the feeling persisted. The smell grew stronger, and now his compass was acting strangely, the needle spinning slowly, then locking onto a direction that wasn't north. It pointed toward the area where the smell was strongest. After what felt like an eternity, but was probably only minutes, the sensation gradually faded. The smell dissipated. His compass returned to normal. The oppressive sense of being watched lifted like fog burning off in sunlight. When he radioed Dr. Chen an hour later and they compared notes, Chen reported the exact same experience. The watching sensation, the musky smell, and strange compass behavior. His compass had also pointed toward the source of the odor before returning to normal when the smell disappeared. This was the first concrete pattern the NIDS team had identified. Magnetic interference seemed to be associated with the phenomena. Whatever was happening on this ranch, it had a measurable electromagnetic component. Over the coming months, more incidents would occur, each one stripping away another layer of skepticism from the scientific team. These weren't believers in the paranormal. These were PhD scientists with reputations to protect. But one by one, they were experiencing things that defied every rational explanation they could conceive. June 1997, the thing that reads mind-surly June. Shortly after 11 p.m., Dr. Colum Kelleher and Dr. Eric Davis were conducting one of their regular nighttime stakeouts. They'd positioned themselves in front of the Middle homestead, the abandoned structure that seemed to be a focal point for paranormal activity. Davis had night vision goggles, standard equipment for observing the property after dark. Kelleher was taking long exposure photographs of the night sky, hoping to capture any aerial anomalies. The dogs began whimpering first, that familiar warning sign they'd learned to recognize. Both scientists tensed, scanning the darkness. "Jesus," Davis breathed suddenly, his voice tight. "There's something in the trees over there, big, really big, black." Kelleher couldn't see anything with his naked eyes, but he immediately swung his camera toward the tree line Davis indicated and began taking photographs. "It's huge," Davis continued, his voice increasingly strained. "I'm not sure if it's in the trees or behind them. It's moving. Heading north." Then Davis went rigid. When he spoke again, his voice had changed, flat, almost mechanical. "It's got me. It's in my head. It's saying, 'We are watching you.'" Kelleher kept his camera trained on the trees, deeply unnerved by his colleague's tone. Davis kept muttering "Jesus Christ" over and over, like a prayer or mantra, his hands trembling slightly as he held the night vision goggles. Finally, after several long minutes, Davis lowered the goggles. "It's moving away. It's gone." "What the hell just happened?" Kelleher demanded. Davis shook his head, unable or unwilling to articulate the experience. "I don't know. It was like it got inside my head. I could feel it, hear it. Not words exactly, but meaning, intent." As they walked back to the observation trailer, Kelleher noticed his colleague was deeply shaken, more disturbed than he'd ever seen him. Dr. Eric Davis was a physicist, a man of logic and equations. Whatever he'd experienced out there had rattled him to his core. The incident raised terrifying questions. Was the phenomena intelligent? Could it interact with human consciousness? And if it could read minds or project thoughts, what else was it capable of? August 1997, the portal August 3:30 a.m. Two investigators, Mike Henderson and Jim Vasquez, were stationed on the ridge overlooking the Middle homestead. They'd been there for 3 hours, taking turns with the infrared binoculars, both men fighting fatigue. Mike had the binoculars when he suddenly straightened. "I've got something." Light in the pasture, about 150 feet down. Jim looked in that direction and could see only a faint, dull glow, barely noticeable. But through the infrared binoculars, Mike reported it was brilliant, almost as bright as the moon. "It's hovering about 3 feet off the ground," Mike narrated, keeping the binoculars fixed on the phenomenon. "And it's getting bigger or closer. I can't tell which." Jim checked their instruments, noting electromagnetic readings were spiking. "It's not a light," Mike said suddenly, his voice filled with wonder and fear. "It's a tunnel. I can see through it. There's another side." "What?" "Let me see." Jim reached for the binoculars, but Mike waved him off, transfixed. "Something's in the tunnel. Oh God, something's coming through. It's crawling, using its elbows and knees. It's big, really big, black. No features, just shape, mass. Jim grabbed his radio, about to call for backup, when Mike's voice rose in pitch. It's out. It just climbed out of the tunnel, and Jesus, it's running. Straight up the ridge, toward us. Both men heard it then. The distinct crunch of shale and gravel growing louder, something massive moving at impossible speed. The sound passed within 30 feet of their position and continued past them into the darkness beyond. Then silence. Complete, absolute silence. No insects, no wind, no animal sounds. Just stillness and that now familiar musky odor hanging in the air. Neither man slept that night. When they filed their report the next morning, their hands were still shaking as they wrote, a portal. Something had opened up and something had come through. The implications were staggering. The pattern emerges. From 1996 through 1998, the NIDS team documented hundreds of incidents. They witnessed the same phenomena the Shermans had described, the floating orbs of light that seemed to respond intelligently, metallic craft hovering silently over the property, creatures that defied biological classification, devastating cattle mutilations, poltergeist activity inside buildings, magnetic anomalies, underground sounds like machinery or digging, and portal-like structures that seemed to open briefly before disappearing. The scientists experienced the same strange odors, the sensation of being watched, the equipment failures that occurred at the most crucial moments. They watched as cameras inexplicably malfunctioned just before major events. They documented how phenomena always seemed to occur just outside their camera's field of view, as if whoever was responsible knew exactly where they were looking and deliberately avoided direct documentation. It was infuriating. When they set up cameras facing north, activity happened to the south. When they repositioned everything to the south, the next incident occurred to the east. It was almost as if the phenomena was playing with them, staying always one step ahead. Equipment would work perfectly for weeks, then suddenly fail during critical moments, only to function normally again afterward. Batteries that should have lasted hours would drain in minutes. Recording devices would show blank footage, despite being activated during active phenomena. Robert Bigelow himself would later describe whatever was on the ranch as precognitive sentient intelligence. It knew what they were thinking. It knew what they were planning, and it had no intention of being caught on film. By mid-1998, the activity began to decline. The incidents became less frequent, less dramatic. It was almost as if the phenomena had grown bored with the investigation or had accomplished whatever purpose it had. The NIDS team would remain on the property for 6 more years, but the golden age of activity had passed. In 2004, they finally closed down the investigation, packing up their equipment and leaving the ranch much as they'd found it. They had not succeeded in explaining what was occurring, but they had documented it extensively, and more importantly, they had experienced it themselves. Whatever skepticism they'd arrived with had been thoroughly demolished by years of first-hand encounters with the impossible. The evidence. Debate skeptics often claim that NIDS failed to gather any evidence. This isn't entirely accurate, though it requires context. The team did record phenomena on film. Terry Sherman had captured footage before NIDS arrived, and the scientific team recorded numerous incidents during their investigation. Some of this footage appears in Jeremy Corbell's documentary, Hunt for the Skinwalker. However, most of this video evidence was deemed inconclusive by the NIDS advisory board. The problem was that the majority of footage showed lights at night, distant, indistinct points of light that could be explained away as aircraft, satellites, or atmospheric phenomena. In darkness, without reference points or clear details, these recordings failed to meet the rigorous standards required for scientific proof. The phenomena seemed deliberately camera-shy, or more accurately, it seemed to actively avoid being documented. Equipment failures weren't random, they were precisely timed. Activity occurred in locations specifically chosen to avoid cameras. The few clear recordings that were obtained showed nothing that couldn't be disputed or explained away by determined skeptics. Dr. Kelleher and his team made a critical observation. Whatever was haunting the ranch did not want to be studied. It did not want to be documented. It was not cooperating with the investigation. In fact, it seemed to be actively sabotaging their efforts, while simultaneously tormenting them with experiences that left no doubt the phenomena was real. The entity, or entities, appeared to be always one step ahead, as if it could read their intentions and plans. When they expected activity in one location, it occurred elsewhere. When they prepared for one type of event, something completely different happened. The phenomena never repeated itself in predictable patterns. Each incident was unique, making it impossible to anticipate and prepare for the next occurrence. Robert Bigelow, who funded the entire operation to the tune of millions of dollars, concluded that they were dealing with precognitive sentient intelligence, something that could perceive future events or read human thoughts, allowing it to stay perpetually ahead of any investigation. The eyewitness accounts, despite the lack of definitive physical evidence, there are hundreds of well-documented eyewitness testimonies. These come not just from the Sherman family or Needy's team, but from neighbors, other residents of the Uinta Basin, law enforcement personnel, journalists, and visitors who ventured onto the property out of curiosity. The consistency across these accounts is striking. People who have never met, who visited the ranch years apart, report similar experiences: the orbs of light, the feeling of being watched, the strange odors, the magnetic anomalies, the sense of dread that permeates certain areas of the property. Native American tribes in the region have their own accounts stretching back generations. The Ute people firmly believe the land is cursed, placed under a hex by Navajo shamans after being driven from northeastern Utah. Their oral histories describe skinwalkers, witches who can transform into animals and who bring death and misfortune. Local ranchers have their own stories, though many are reluctant to speak publicly for fear of ridicule. Cattle mutilations matching those found on Skinwalker Ranch have been reported throughout the Uinta Basin for decades. Strange lights in the sky are common enough that longtime residents barely comment on them anymore. The phenomenon isn't limited to Skinwalker Ranch, it's endemic to the entire region. But the ranch itself seems to be an epicenter, a focal point, where all of these strange occurrences converge with unusual intensity and frequency. The theories: so if the phenomena is real, and the sheer volume of credible testimony suggests something genuinely anomalous is occurring, what could explain it? The hoax theory: could this all be an elaborate fabrication? It seems unlikely for multiple reasons. First, the Shermans didn't benefit financially from their claims. If anything, declaring your property is haunted devalues it significantly. Second, why would they invent such bizarre, unbelievable stories rather than simpler, more credible ones? Third, the phenomenon was reported in the region long before the Shermans owned the property. Fourth, Robert Bigelow spent millions investigating the claims and came away convinced. Fifth, credentialed scientists with reputations to protect documented the phenomena themselves. A hoax of this scale, involving this many people over this many years, would be nearly impossible to maintain. Mass delusion theory. Were all these people experiencing shared psychosis or hallucinations? NIDS extensively tested for this possibility. They found no environmental factors, no toxic compounds, no water contamination, no electromagnetic fields, no infrasound sources that would induce hallucinations. There was no psychological commonality among witnesses that would suggest mass delusion. Most importantly, physical evidence was left behind. Mutilated cattle, magnetized metal, anomalous tracks. These physical traces weren't imagined. Extraterrestrial theory. Many of the incidents involved UFOs and strange craft, leading many to assume alien visitation. However, all physical traces analyzed by NIDS yielded terrestrial signatures. Nothing of obvious extraterrestrial origin was ever found. This doesn't completely rule out alien involvement, but it suggests the explanation might be more complex than simple ET visitation. Skinwalker theory. Native American legends describe shape-shifting witches with malevolent powers. Many aspects of the phenomena do align with these traditional descriptions: creatures that shift form, curses on the land, predatory behavior toward animals. But Skinwalker legends don't account for the UFOs, the portals, the advanced technology apparently involved, unless skinwalkers are something far more complex than folklore suggests. Military experimentation theory. Terry Sherman's original theory that secretive military programs were testing advanced technology on unwitting civilians. It's plausible that the military could have access to technology that appears paranormal. The remote location would be ideal for covert testing. However, this theory doesn't explain reports dating back centuries, long before such technology existed. It also doesn't account for the seemingly supernatural aspects, mind reading, interdimensional portals, shape-shifting creatures. Unless the military is far more advanced than anyone suspects, or unless they're collaborating with non-human intelligence. Interdimensional gateway theory. This hypothesis suggests the ranch sits atop some kind of thin spot between dimensions, a place where entities from other realities can more easily cross into ours. This would explain the variety of phenomena, different types of entities, cryptids, aliens, spirits, all coming from the same source. It would explain why activity seems intelligent and aware. These entities have their own motivations and consciousness. It explains the portal sightings, literally doorways between dimensions. And it explains why the phenomenon has been ongoing for centuries. The gateway is a permanent feature of the location, not a temporary anomaly. The unified phenomena theory. Some researchers propose that all paranormal and supernatural phenomena worldwide, UFOs, cryptids, ghosts, poltergeists, you name it, originate from the same source. We see fleeting glimpses when entities choose to manifest or when conditions allow them to cross over. But certain locations like Skinwalker Ranch are hotspots where the barrier is thinner and multiple types of phenomena can appear with greater frequency. This would explain why the ranch exhibits such diverse activity that seems to make no logical sense when viewed as separate incidents. Remote viewing insights. In a fascinating addition to their investigation, the NADS Advisory Board consulted several professional remote viewers, individuals trained in the controversial practice of gathering information about distant or unseen targets through extrasensory perception. The CIA and military intelligence had studied and utilized remote viewing for over 30 years, with some remarkable documented successes. While mainstream science remains skeptical, the results in some cases were impressive enough that the programs continued for decades. NIDS contacted several remote viewers independently, providing them with no information about the ranch or its location. They were simply given coordinates and asked to describe what they perceived. The first viewer produced a detailed sketch of the property that was remarkably accurate. The three homesteads, the creek, the canal, the ridge, all positioned correctly, despite having no prior knowledge of the location. He identified an area in the southwestern section of the property, stating that a disturbing energy field was concentrated there. Another viewer described weird energy vortices centered around the second homestead, the abandoned structure where some of the most terrifying phenomena occurred. A third viewer was asked specifically about the cattle mutilation incident. He described seeing what he called a drone of interdimensional nature performing the mutilation. He also stated that whatever did this had connections to military operations, though he couldn't clarify if the military was controlling the phenomenon or studying it. Multiple remote viewing sessions conducted by different individuals described an underground military base or facility beneath the property. 3 out of 5 participants independently perceived a large network of electronic equipment and wiring embedded in the ground. Several saw military personnel, specifically Navy personnel, some even describing tattoos and dark sunglasses. One viewer described what appeared to be humanoid figures, speaking in an unknown language, working alongside human beings. Others perceived that much of the activity occurred outdoors at night and had connections to an aircraft carrier, though the significance of this detail remains unclear. Perhaps most disturbing, every single remote viewer who examined the property reported the same emotional response: dread, darkness, and an overwhelming sense of death. They described the location as inherently evil, as if malevolent intelligence saturated the very ground. One viewer specifically stated that the ranch served as some kind of interdimensional gateway where entities could enter our reality at will and depart just as easily. The remote viewing data, while controversial and unverifiable through traditional scientific means, presented intriguing patterns and consistencies that added another layer to the mystery. The intelligence question, one of the most chilling aspects of the phenomena, is its apparent intelligence and awareness. Whatever haunts Skinwalker Ranch demonstrates selective targeting. Not a single human being was ever physically harmed, despite years of activity. Yet countless animals, cattle, dogs, cats, wildlife were killed, often in brutal fashion. This suggests discrimination, choice, intentionality, responsive behavior. The phenomena seem to react to human thoughts and conversations. When Gwen mentioned concern about the bulls, they were immediately targeted. When scientists planned observations, activity occurred elsewhere. When specific equipment was deployed, the phenomena avoided those areas. Mind-reading capability. Multiple witnesses reported the sensation that whatever was present could perceive their thoughts. Eric Davis's experience of having an entity communicate, "We are watching you," directly into his mind, exemplifies this disturbing capability. Precognition. The ability to stay one step ahead of trained scientific investigators suggests either future sight or real-time access to human thoughts and plans, playfulness or malevolence. The phenomena often seem to be toying with people, moving bulls into impossible locations, making creatures appear and vanish, leading investigators on wild goose chases. Whether this represents a malicious intelligence enjoying the torment of humans or something more complex remains unclear. Omnipresence. The awareness seemed to extend across the entire property simultaneously, as if a single intelligence monitored everything occurring on the ranch at all times. Robert Bigelow's description of precognitive sentient intelligence captures this perfectly. Whatever this is, it's not random. It's not natural phenomena misinterpreted. It's something aware, something conscious, something with its own agenda. And that might be the most terrifying aspect of all. Aftermath and ongoing mystery. More than 2 decades after the Sherman family fled their nightmare, the story of Skinwalker Ranch continues to evolve. The Shermans relocated to Idaho, where they rebuilt their lives far from the property that destroyed their dreams. They've largely stayed out of the public eye, having no desire to relive their trauma or defend themselves against skeptics. They know what they experienced. They don't need validation from strangers on the internet. Robert Bigelow maintained ownership of the property for 20 years after purchasing it from the Shermans. Throughout that time, he kept the ranch secure and private, preventing curiosity seekers from trespassing. The activity remained sporadic throughout the 2000s and early 2010s, never quite reaching the intensity of the late 1990s. In 2016, Bigelow sold the property to Adamantium Real Estate, but with one critical condition: scientific investigation must continue. The new owner couldn't simply turn it into a tourist attraction or abandon it. The search for answers had to go on. Almost immediately after the sale, the phenomena experienced a dramatic resurgence. UFOs were photographed directly over the homestead. New incidents began occurring with increased frequency. It was as if the change in ownership triggered a renewal of activity, or perhaps whatever intelligence was present was responding to the arrival of new people. In Jeremy Corbell's documentary Hunt for the Skinwalker, he interviews the new owner and asks what he says to people who doubt the phenomena is real. The owner's response is simple and direct: "You're delusional." That statement carries weight. This isn't someone seeking attention or trying to profit from wild stories. This is someone who purchased the property knowing its history, who has experienced the phenomena firsthand, and who has no patience for armchair skeptics who dismiss what they haven't witnessed. Current investigations continue with more advanced technology than was available to NIDS in the 1990s. Sophisticated sensor arrays, advanced cameras, drone surveillance, real-time monitoring systems, all deployed in the ongoing effort to document and understand what occurs on this mysterious property. Some claim progress is being made. Others remain frustrated by the same patterns that plagued NIDS. The phenomena stays elusive, always slightly beyond definitive capture, always aware of observation attempts. What lies beneath? So what is Skinwalker Ranch? After thousands of words examining the evidence, the theories, and the experiences, we're left with more questions than answers. Is it a doorway to other dimensions where countless entities, alien, cryptid, spiritual, or something we have no words for, slip through into our reality? Is it a testing ground where military black programs experiment with technologies so advanced they appear supernatural? Is it truly cursed land where Native American magic holds power centuries after being cast? Is it a focal point of extraterrestrial interest, where beings from other worlds conduct their own studies on Earth life and human behavior? Or is it something even stranger, a place where reality itself is somehow thinner, weaker, more malleable, allowing the impossible to briefly become possible? The frustrating truth is that despite decades of investigation, millions of dollars in funding, hundreds of credentialed witnesses, and countless documented incidents, we still don't know. What we do know is this: something extraordinary occurs on that property. Something that defies our current understanding of physics, biology, and reality itself. Something intelligent, aware, and operating according to rules we don't comprehend. The Sherman family lived through hell for 2 years before escaping. The NIDS team spent 8 years trying to catch something that clearly didn't want to be caught. Investigations continue to this day, with researchers hoping that eventually, through persistence and advancing technology, the truth will reveal itself. But maybe that's not what the intelligence behind the phenomena wants. Maybe it prefers to remain in shadow, glimpsed but never fully seen, documented but never proven, feared but never understood. Whatever haunts Skinwalker Ranch has been there for centuries. It will likely remain there for centuries more, waiting in the darkness, watching those who dare to seek it, always one step ahead, always beyond reach. And perhaps that's exactly how it wants things to stay. The truth is out there, but I'm not interested in being found, not yet.